This is J.L. Mosman, and this is the Talking Right Podcast. Now, the Talking Right Podcast is a mix of religion and politics. It's a mix of cultural, entertainment, and sociological issues. It is a melding pot. Not melting, melding, because we're going to meld it all together. I'm just joking. It's a melting pot. It's an idea that we can do a couple of different things and talk about them. Unlike my show, Theologically Speaking, which is an interview show that is mostly about religion. It's all about religion. And my other show, which is my other podcast, the Beyond the Stone Table podcast, which is about myth and religion and religion in how that interacts with myth. But this is more of your casual talk show podcast, and we're going to try to mix, deep, meaningful context with substantive, meaningful debate, but then also like really a bunch of foolishness and malarkey and whatever else we want to put in this damn podcast. Be right back. This is the J.L. Mosman podcast. Actually, it's a Talking Right podcast. I just wanted to create a new, different name. Oh, it's Talking Right. It's J.L. Mosman. Whatever. What we'll do, we'll figure it out when we come back from the break. Stick tuned. Hello, everyone. I'm back. Sometimes I realize I have this problem. I don't know if you've ever had that problem, but I sometimes like to say two different things that mean the same thing and try to say them at the same time. So I was trying to say, stay tuned, or stick around. And then I couldn't decide which one I wanted to say. So my brain does it, so it ends up saying stick tune. Like, what the hell does stick tune mean? I'm sorry, my brain does this. This is just an odd thing that I do. I think this is part of my learning disability I have, where my brain just decides, okay, we don't know which word we're going to say today. We'll just say both and see if it sticks. Stick tunes. Maybe it's stick tunes. Ladies and gentlemen, this podcast is brought to you by the word stick tune. For those who are either of some kind of learning disability, or if you're on some kind of major drug, stick tune is the way you can say to those who care to stop what you're doing and start what? Yeah, see, that's how it goes. It's my brain. My brain. It doesn't like to do what I like to do. It wants to give me all these options, right? It's like when you're shopping. Oh, yes, let's have the steak, but then we'll have the steak potato, spec potato. And then I say specs potato, and it comes out that way. So please, excuse that when that happens. I try to edit that out for your delightful editing, but I thought, we're getting to know each other again in this podcast in a way that I've never revealed myself. And hopefully will never again. But that we figure it out in a way that... Never mind. I'm just saying I am trying to tell you in a way that's really confounded and hard. But that sometimes I say words and they don't make sense. I leave this in this podcast as a warning, as a kind of Rosetta Stone for you in future podcasts. Just so you know. Stick tuned, though, because the J.L. Mosman podcast, which is actually the Talking Right pod. See, it does that. It's like, ooh, but the J.L. Mosman podcast sounds really good, doesn't it? It sounds great. It has to sound great, but does it? No, it doesn't. No, but it does. But stay Talking Right. But I want to say Talking Right. But I'm J.L. Mosman. Yeah, that's how it goes. Sometimes that's how it goes. So what I have to tell you right now is that that's just kind of what happens, right? When you say things you don't mean, or that your brain gives you multiple options of things that you like to hear, of things that you like to say, because your brain loves you. My brain loves me. It wants me to have all my options. And I want you to ignore this little segment of the podcast and move on. But then, like, when you have that little weird moment when I say something like stick tune down the road, listen to this and you go, oh, yeah, that's right. This is the guy that says stick tune. We'll be right back. This is J.L. Mosman. This is the Talking Right podcast, and that's exactly how I'm supposed to do it if my brain will allow me today. We'll be right back. All right, we're back, and now on to the main segment. You know, I was talking to myself about what I was going to do for the first episode of the Talking Right podcast, and you know, when it hit me, I wanted to talk about, politics and religion and a mixture of all those things. And to me, like, no one takes the cake right now, politically speaking, than Donald Trump. But I don't want to get into the Donald Trump and all the things that people have gotten into so far. To me, I'm more about looking at Donald Trump in the sense of, what do his followers or the people who are supporters of him think? And what do people who rally around the same kind of rhetoric that he speaks, what motivates them? I think it's interesting, if we're going to talk about politics, we talk about some of the psychological and sociological factors that go into determining why someone might, lean, whether we say Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal, or lean towards certain key voting issues. Trump, in a lot of ways, he kind of begs to be defined in this. He doesn't have the classifications of someone who's normally in one of those groups. We would say that if we had to put him in a grouping, it would probably be a sort of rhino, right? He's towing the line of neocon, rhino, warhawk, Republican speak. So he does kind of have that. So for the people out there who say he's not really a Republican, I don't know if you can really say that right now, because some of the things he is saying, some of the rhetoric he's saying, is things that have classically been definitive of rhino republicanism. And also, of course, the fact that he has taken on some of the hot issues that people who are within the Republican Party take on. For example, the immigration issue. But really, it's not so much the issues that he talks about. It's how he talks about them and where he comes at. We get the sense that he's talking loud. He's talking strong about politics, on the issue of immigration, but we don't get a real clear picture. For me, it's interesting. We look at the way he says the things that he says. We look at the way he talks about these issues, because for me, and this is just my honest to truth perception of the man, but it seems as if he's okay with allowing himself to be perceived a certain way. I think he wants to be perceived as a rhino, neocon, war hawk Republican. Someone who's strong on defense, someone who's strong against terrorism and on immigration, someone who will be a good beacon for foreign policy, which we've not had any president really since probably, in my opinion, JFK have any really good foreign policy initiative. And so we have to ask ourselves, how does that come about? Is this something where he's just saying it? And this is where I would think a history of who Donald Trump is comes into play. He's always kind of broadcasting himself, if you will, as this man who's strong, he's rich, he's these things. And oftentimes he is not what he has the perception. So we get the sense, if you've made any kind of observation of Trump, that he is always trying to put himself as someone he wants to be perceived as, without actually giving any kind of substantive conversation. Nothing in his platform is substantive. Nothing in his platform tells us exactly why he wants to do that or why he thinks that's a good decision for the country. So we have to ask ourselves, when we look at the language of Donald Trump, is he doing it because he knows it's eliciting an expression? I think that's a very defendable position to have. I think anyone who has the perception that Donald Trump is saying these things just because people like to hear it, I think that holds some weight. I think, but it's not that simple. And to me, I've said this, Donald Trump reminds me of Barack Obama. If we vote for Trump, and this is not saying this in a sense of, ABCD, political ideology or political, what's his platform, right? All these kinds of things. Like, will it be exactly the same? Of course it won't be exactly the same. But much of how he approaches his problems, the way he goes about defending his positions, is very much likened to Obama. You see Obama also unable to handle criticism. And whenever you see someone bringing substantive, critical, constructive criticisms, when they're actually saying, look, how can you say you're for women when you say A, B, C, D, E? And he then attacks them. One has to come to a couple of conclusions about why he's actually doing that. One is that, is it a tactic? Sure. And he is not the first person ever in the game to deflect like that, right? To make the issue not about him answering the question. Everybody in politics likes to deflect. They don't really want to give you the answer. A, because they don't have it all well thought of. And B, they right now are playing a game of hedging their bets, right? They don't want to say anything that will get them too pissed off or get one person this or that. And even though we would look at Donald Trump and say he is saying some very incendiary language and using a lot of things, he still isn't saying certain things that could be out of the vein, things that would really upset people to a degree that would be where we would like, okay, now not only is this guy not considered for president, which I don't think he should be, but now this guy needs to be probably looked at in a mental hospital, or this guy needs to be put in prison because he's saying some things that are just god-awful. That is something that has to be looked at. But what we're looking at when we're looking at the claims and the way that Trump says, okay, this is how I'm going to deal with criticism, he always deflects and he always attacks. And he makes it personal. He did it with Megyn Kelly, and he's done it in every debate he's in. And to him, it gives to me, and for a lot of people, I would imagine, makes him look childish, immature. It makes him look like he's the little kid that doesn't like that someone's told him that he's got to play good with all the other kids. But I think that it's more than that. I do. I don't, like I said, I don't put it past the fact that could be very much part of the psyche of who Donald Trump is, because he's always kind of being a bullhorn. He's always being, loud and brash and always threatening people who don't go along with him. That, of course, is Obama right there, right? Well, how many times has Obama done that? But the question for me comes to it as, why is that? Is he doing this because it's generic? Is it completely 100% organic reason for him? Is it that? Or is it that he is being very precise and very specific, and he understands that the last president, the president that's now in office, has used a lot of incendiary language, has said things that have invoked emotion, and there was a lot of emotion that went into Obama winning the presidency, right? Of course, the first black president. This guy's going to be, helping me with my mortgage. There was a lot of people who had like this euphoria about Obama getting in. And now it seems that the issue or the main emotion, if you will, isn't joy or celebration, but anger. And it seems that maybe this could be by design or custom. Maybe this has happened before Trump. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if that's the case. If this has nothing to do with Trump himself, if he is just fulfilling that need for someone, or as if he's really that brilliant. It's hard to tell. And there are moments when we can go back and forth and say, what way do we know? But I would say this, and this is really the bigger issue for me, is that we have a lot of people out there who like Trump because he says things that make us feel good about being pissed off, right? We don't like terrorism, right? Right after 9/11, it's like, let's go get those towelheads. Let's go and bomb the hell out of Iran and Iraq, and let's go kill every one of them. That's the emotion that comes from that, and it's understand. We have that. It's what we call the lynch mob mentality, right? Whenever we are a party, or whenever we witness or see such a ghastly crime, such a ghastly, terrible disaster, we have to, in a collective sense, emotional release from it. We have to. We have to. You go back in the history of our country, we did this throughout many times. One of the biggest moments that this did happen was under the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, where we had a lot of people who we didn't have a lot of evidence about them being involved with the Lincoln assassination, but there was such a push to just put anyone and charge them with the crime, or have someone pay that price for killing someone who had become, for so many people, a beloved person or character, that we end up having these kinds of moments where these emotions, and it seems that a lot of the elections anymore are not about substantive policy issues, like how do we deal with the fact that this country has about 70% of its debt owned by China? How do we deal with terrorism in the 21st century when most of these terrorist countries, most of these terrorist threats aren't actual countries? They're not, you've got people who are living in Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq and Kuwait, and living also in London and in Boston and wherever. They're living all over the place. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with an economic issue? None of this stuff is thought. Everything is emotional. All of the issues are emotional. Abortion is emotional. Gay marriage is emotional. Even the environment has become an emotional issue, right? Global warming, climate change, these kinds of things have become emotional responses to things. And we now respond that way. And there's no doubt to me that Donald Trump has indeed gotten into that mentality. He's tapped into something. The question is what he's tapped into a good thing? Is what he's tapped into accurate? Who knows? I would say it could be a bit both. But the reality is there's a lot of people mad. And everybody seems to be mad at the establishment. They seem to be mad at the media. They seem to be mad at anybody who has been in charge of something in the last 20 years. And unfortunately for people who are Democrats and Democratic strategists, most of those people have been Democrats and Republicans. So again, we get into the situation where someone like Donald Trump, who doesn't necessarily follow some of those conventions, those conventional like characteristics that we see of a Democrat or Republican, is now doing well. I think it's very interesting that we're in a situation politically where the guys who are doing really well right now, like Bernie Sanders, he's doing pretty good, and Trump, are guys who aren't the conventional guy for the party. But yet they're both the same branch off the same tree. They represent the same thing. And I don't know if it's some kind of mechanism within our country, something that allows us to vote for us because we have to get out this emotion. But it should scare us that we do it. It should scare us that what motivates us more than anything else to vote is emotions. And that what is making Trump a little bit more popular seems to be an anger, especially anger towards people who aren't the quote-unquote typical classical American. Or at least in the sense that Donald Trump would have us think. There's a lot to think about on this issue. To me, I would like to look at it from this sense because we have stopped looking at things from a very contextual and a very conclusive, thought-out way. We've just become way too sensitive to the emotions of what facts are attached. When you say we can't do something and we don't have the means to feed a lot of people who are coming into this country, whether they be Syrian refugees or illegal immigrants, there's a lot of people that don't like the emotion that comes from that, right? Well, why shouldn't we? Why can't we? But they're starving, but they're hurt, but they're this, but they're this, but they're that. It's hard. And we should be worried that our country seems to put those emotions ahead of things. And it's not just an issue of us being petty politically and ideologically, but emotionally. That's some food for thought on this segment on politics. Again, I'm looking at this from a different way than normally I think people would be. To me, this isn't about some of the things that people say do or not, but examining some of these things. For me, Trump makes an interesting case study because it is a very scary thought that someone can say the things that he has said and can still be not only leading in the polls for the Republican primary, but still has significant popularity. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll head into our next segment that has nothing to do with politics. What it will be, well, I guess you're just going to have to find out. This is Talking Right podcast, and I am your host, J.L. Mosman. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. This is the Talking Right podcast, and I am your host, J.L. Mosman. Well, did you guys catch the Oscars last night? I'm sure most of you either caught segments of it, or some of you did actually watch the full thing. I did watch the full thing. It was actually one of the first Oscars that I wasn't completely nauseated by everything I was hearing. Of course, I expected to be, because when they said that Chris Rock was going to be hosting the Oscars, and of course with this whole drama about there being no black nominees, I'd wondered where he'd take it. And of course, he made a couple of remarks that that hit home with people who felt like the Oscars were kind of being racist. I guess. Or being racially motivated to do something. I don't know, but he also made other great points about the importance of people. And he did it very funnily. I mean, he did it very smart, but it was very funny. Talking about black people back in the 60s and the 50s, and probably even in the 70s, not caring whether or not a black person won Best Oscar for Best Hair Design or blah, blah, blah. And the whole point being that there were greater issues at bay, that people were worried about real problems, real examples of racism. And he talked about the fact that people, kind of have to trump this stuff up. It's not like the most extreme version of racism, but that's not what we're hearing from people who are making the comment. And, it's one of those things where you go, at the end of the day, really, this is a first world problem if there's no black Oscar nominees, right? I would think, if I was someone who was black, I would rather say, you know what, the fact that black people like Tyler Perry, who's able to pretty much make his own movies whenever he wants to with that character Medea, the fact that you have actors like Denzel Washington, Will Smith, and Morgan Freeman, who are able to be in a lot of movies and make a lot of money from the movies, the fact that we have a black president, the fact that we do not anymore have segregation in this country, I think those would be things that I would focus on. But I think this whole thing with the Oscars has given us some light on the whole idea of niche political faux, social problems, right? This idea that we've got a cause. And Hollywood always seems to have a cause, right? And a bunch of them are liberals, and so they have to have this idea of a cause. And I think it's even worse with Hollywood because I think to them, they realize at some point they're just actors. Their purpose in this life is to just make movies. And so therefore they have to feel like in order to really connect, to really make a difference, they have to make a movie about something like climate change or about world hunger, or they have to go and talk with, dictators or whatever. Hollywood, this is nothing new to Hollywood. This is something that whenever you get the Hollywood elite who realize they're nothing more than people whose business is to make pretend stories, and sometimes make real stories, but still to pretend to be people they're not. They must have to feel some kind of odd burden to want to make something. And so you get someone like Leo DiCaprio who gives an emotional and very well spoken plea for climate change awareness. But again, look at what he has. One could even question whether or not he's the kind of person that should be speaking about this because of how many yachts he takes, how many jets he cruises around the world. We're talking about a guy who can rent, and has done this in the past, rents out islands, right? To him, he is so stinking rich that the idea that he speaks for the little guy or that he wants to represent the little guy is absurd. If Hollywood really cared about the little guy, as they say they do, they'd push to have their movie tickets lower in price. But they don't do that, right? Because that's their bread and butter. This is something that we've always seen from kind of the socialist, liberal people in our country that it's always about raising your taxes, but then it's not, don't let me pay. They're always trying to get you to feel guilty about not producing or not contributing more for people who are in poverty. That's why you have to pay more taxes, yada yada yada. But then they never go after themselves, or they never themselves give them a lot of the money that they have towards that. And part of that is this need to feel like they are doing something. This whole environmental thing is a lot like the whole black issue that has going on at the Oscars. And it's something that George Carlin understood when he talked about the bourgeois liberal. When he talked about the idea that the person who's out there actually trying to do something for the environment is actually someone who just wants a better bike path, right? Someone who just wants to have an experience in nature where they don't see something that they don't like. And again, with the issue of the black Oscars and the snub, we don't see any of these black actors and actresses coming out and saying, well, what about someone like Benicio del Toro, who was phenomenal in Insecure? What about people like him who weren't in that, who weren't even nominated, but gave a great performance? What about the guys who are Asian? What about the guy, all of these different things. But they don't care about that. It's the same reason why they like groups like Black Lives Matter, because to them it's all about being inclusive. It's all about staying exclusive to what they want. It's all about staying to their group. They don't want to ever stretch out or move out to do anything for anybody else but themselves. So to them, their whining isn't about any real misjustice, but rather the fact that they are upset. For example, Jada Pinkett Smith, the reason why she's upset is because she thinks Will Smith should have won an Oscar or been nominated for his performance in Concussion. And I'm sure he didn't stink up the joint with his performance in that movie. But I have heard from people who watched that movie that said that movie just was flat. It was just flat. And the whole problem that you have when you get these socialist liberals in Hollywood is that for them, the idea of, well, if you want to be nominated, do a better role. Now, there could be the issue of whether or not black people are getting better roles, but I'm sorry. There are certain roles that you can't cast out to being black. And this is the whole thing that just drives me nuts, right? We have this kind of idea, well, let's just throw in that token black guy, and he'll belong in the medieval, Anglo-Saxon story. What? Okay, take a performance like Leonardo DiCaprio's in The Revenant. He plays somebody who is a real guy, based on a real guy. Was that guy black? No, he wasn't black. So how could Will Smith or Denzel Washington or anyone else who was bitching about this whole thing with the Oscars actually be in that performance? There's got to be something to be accurate, right? You don't want to just say, well, we're just going to have, we're going to make a movie about Dalton Trumbo, but we're going to put a guy who's black, even though Dalton Trumbo was white. Or we're going to have, let's make a movie about Nina Simone now, and let's have Taylor Swift play her. Oh, wow, you'll see the remarks then, wouldn't you? But, overall, I enjoyed the Oscars last night. And I think because I finally have given the Oscars and the Hollywood liberal elite, I've put them in the place where they deserve. They're a group of people who are complaining about issues that are usually niche issues, or issues that are redacted to something that personally impacts them, rather than something that is a global impact. And, of course, you could say, well, that's not what Leo is doing, blah, 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 global warming, blah, blah, blah. But, just like with Al Gore and his company making a profit off of, carbon footprints and doing that kind of stuff, I'm telling you, if they don't have skin in the game, then they're being hired by somebody to be their focal piece. And I don't understand how a lot of my friends who are quote-unquote the atheist skeptics, right? The skeptical atheists, right? Don't buy this, don't see through this hogwash. I've always thought that was kind of insane, but, excuse me. Now, I'm just done with caring about it. I've already seen on Facebook and Twitter the memes about what Leo said and what other things that were said at the Oscars. I'm just content into saying what I've always said, which is this is a bunch of people who need an issue to complain about. They need something to complain about because the reality is that we have not been more greener than we are now. And obviously you can say, well, that's because we've done A, B, C, or D. Okay, fine. Even though we've always kind of had a claim of global warming or climate change and it's always been made in a vacuum, okay, fine, whatever. We've accepted that there is this, and now green green energy is now a cash cow. Which is one of the reasons why some of the people who push green energy are pushing it is because they have skin in the game. But with that said, you look at the way we are now in our country. We have not done some of the stuff that we have done since the 1970s. I'm talking about using some of the aerosol sprays. I'm talking about how we deal with waste. I'm talking about clean water, clean air, things that have improved. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these I'm going to say they're conservatives. We use this image of the conservative, but I don't think it's a conservative who ever is against the environment. I'm not against the environment, but we have this kind of idea of this, like the neocon, warhawk pro business. Wow, it don't matter if the forest is burning down and the small little animals are getting killed or whatever, as long as they make profit or whatever. I'm not one of those type of guys. I really am not. I do believe that we've had a precedent and that we needed laws to have better waste. We've had a problem with pollution. We've had these problems with how do we take care of our rivers and stuff like that. That's all legitimate stuff in my mind. But right now, the way our vehicles are cleaner than they've ever been. Our appliances are cleaner than they've ever been. The technology to implement a more cleaner energy, which would be nuclear, is at our disposal. Of course, we don't want to do it because people are sold on this idea that windmills are the future. George Clooney. But that doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter. Because in the end, all of this is hubbaroo. And I don't care. I am going to enjoy the Oscars, whether somebody gets up and says something that I know is somewhat half bullcrap and something that I know is propped up to make them feel better for themselves, to make their issues more important. And for me, I guess the issue now is, when do we start making these people not have the power that they have now? And that is by stop falling into these traps of, oh my gosh, let's really get on Leo DiCaprio for what he said at the Oscars. He's an actor. Take it for what it's worth. Take it at the source. I'm not saying the actors are dumb. That's not what I'm saying, because Leo DiCaprio seems to be a very intelligent person. But people who are smart sometimes fall into the emotions of the time. Just like I was talking about with the Trump issue. This idea of emotions hits people. It's a very interesting phenomenon, I think. So, with all that said and done, I think we survived without having any black nominees at the Oscars. And I think if people are upset about that, then they need to ask themselves a more important question, which is, do you not have anything better to do? It's the kind of question I ask with people who are involved in Black Lives Matters, right, that are trying to find something wrong with something, right? Any kind of person that says anything bad about a black person or does anything, and especially if they're in a uniform, let's get Black Lives Matters involved. the trumping of these people in this kind of organization by the President of our United States. Whatever. I'm past it. I know there's a lot of quote-unquote conservatives out there who are not, but I give you this. If we try to fight every fire that's put out there, I'm speaking intellectually here, we're not going to be able to get the big ones. And I guess I would give that kind of advice free to the liberals, who are also trying to trump up the small things in order to make it seem bigger than it really is. Anyways, that's my time for the show. I'm thankful that you listened. And stay tuned, because, not stick tuned, but stay tuned, because in the future we're going to put out more and better podcast episodes. This is the Talking Right podcast. And this is J.L. Mosman.